الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه ومداد كلماته ومنتهى علم جمع ما شاء وخلق وذرع وبرع قالوا لغير شهادة الرحمن الرحيم المالك القدوس العزيز الحكيم وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له الملك له الحمد يحيي ويميت بيده الخير وهو على كل شيء قدير وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله وحبيبه وخليله وأرسله بهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على دين كل لا كرهات المشركين أما بعد وقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم مثل القلب مثل رشاح تقد تقلبها الريح بفلاحه. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he gave an example or a parable of the heart. And he says that the example of the heart is like a feather that is being blown by the wind in the desert, showing how changeable the heart is constantly in rotation. And that's what the word qalb means. The heart is always in rotation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says in the Quran, يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ وَلَا بُنَانٌ بَنُونَ I'm sorry. إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهُ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. Then Allah Ta'ala, he talks about the Qiyamah. He says, on that day, on the day of judgment, your wealth and your progeny, your lineage, your children, you know, who your fathers were, who you connected, if you got clout based off of who you related to or who you connected to. None of that will be any benefit to you on this day. But with the exception of what will benefit you truly on the Qiyamah, إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهُ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. Except for that heart that's solid, that's not constantly wavering back and forth, meaning that it's protecting oneself because the heart is always being challenged by kufr, nifaq, which is really a branch of disbelief, hypocrisy, right? It's constantly being challenged. This is why you notice and take notice that there's times where the actual, let's go back, the central portion of Iman is in the heart. Because what's felt in the heart will motivate what comes off of the limbs. Like, for instance, a person with a solid heart, they'll throw themselves in front of a train for their child or even someone that they love because their heart is that connected to that person. Usually afterwards is where all of the whispering, the wash comes back in. I wouldn't have done that. You should have did this or you should have done that. But the action off of that true firm dedication of the heart, you moved off of that. In our iman, our belief, our yaqeen, our certainty, it fluctuates. It goes up and down. One day it's strong, one day it's weak. Our struggle is, Allah Ta'ala is telling you this. So he's making you aware of what will happen to you. But our job is to make sure that we keep that heart sound so we can die with a qalbul salim, a solid heart. And sometimes we don't do a good job at it because of the things that we invite into to penetrate our heart. Our limbs are the heart is like the kingdom, it's the king. Our limbs work for the heart. So what you allow to penetrate your heart, that's what you're going to give out. Your eyes, Those things that you look at can affect the heart. This is why Allah Ta'ala tell you, don't stare at the sinful people, nor stare at those who are those who disbelieve. Why? Because it'll affect your heart. A perfect example of that is a Muslim who loves jewelry. There's no problem with you loving jewelry. You just can't wear everything, right? But he loved jewelry. And he wants the Jesus piece. So he won't call it the Jesus piece. He'll call it the Isa piece. Looking, how did you come to that point? By constantly looking at that. You seen someone with it and you loved it. Or deep down inside, penetrating, you're really a Christian at heart. And so then you'll fight for that thing that you love. Penetrating. You got to protect your heart. Those things that you eat can affect it. Those things that you listen to can affect it. Those places where you place your limbs can affect it. It'll take a righteous man and make him a mujrim, a criminal. Where you go, what you doing. You ever been caught up in a moment, right? What do you think, like parades and football games, your spirit changes when you're in the arena at a basketball game, or when you're watching a basketball game, your spirit changes. You start behaving in certain manners. You ever see two grown men go into a full fist fight over a sports game that neither one of them are getting paid for? Because that heart was influenced at that moment. But anyway, we want to speak briefly in today's khutbah on the different types of hearts. Walhamdulillahi wa rabbil alameen. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. رضي الله تعالى عنه والسادة التابعين وعلماء عاملين وآئمة أربعة مجتهدين ومقلديهم إلى يوم الدين مبعد. وقال الله سبحانه وتعالى, one of the signs is that hard heart. That heart where nothing penetrates it. They're fixated. Whatever it is that they're going to do, it doesn't matter whether they find an ayat of the Quran, it doesn't move them. Allah Ta'ala, he gives a description of the people whose hearts was like that. He was talking about Bani Israel, particularly in this particular ayat. He said, ثُمَّ قَصَّتَ قُلُوبُكُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ ذَلِكَ فَهِيَ كَالْحَجَرَةِ أَوْ أَشَدُّ قَسْوَةً. Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, he says that their hearts, after that, their hearts became hard like stones. Their hearts became hard like stones. You can't tell the person anything. There's nothing that softens their heart. Their heart is hard like stone. If you have a heart like this, your iman is at minimal, it's very low. The next step down from this is kufr. Because what was the characteristics of the people where the ayahs were being revealed? Well, the Prophet ﷺ was calling them to Islam. It was like they couldn't hear at all, like they didn't even have ears. You remind them, they turn away. They'll laugh at you, make mockery. The same way we do today. You tell a person, hey, listen, you need to be mindful because all of our actions will lead us to either in destruction or it lead us into being rewarded. With what? What do you mean? By paradise or hellfire. This is a particular sin or this is a good deed. They're not moved either way. You can tell them to do good, they don't do good. You tell a person, yo, listen, sadaqah extinguishes bad deeds the way that water puts out a fire. It doesn't move them. You tell them, look, we need to be praying throughout Ramadan, doing Taraweeh and things of that nature. It doesn't move them, right? You need to read the Quran. It doesn't move them. You're calling them to good. If you tell them, hey, listen, you shouldn't be doing this particular sin, come on, man, stop trying to be the haram police. That's the same thing that the kuffar used to do to the Prophet ﷺ. They used to say, he's a jinn, he's a liar, he's a magician, right? And laugh about it and make mockery. When he talked about the Isra wa Mi'raj, when he left from Mecca to Jerusalem and into the heavens, they said, did you hear your man? This is how Abu Bakr got his nickname, as-Siddiq. They went to Abu Bakr, they said, yo, you hear about your man Muhammad? He said he went from Mecca to Jerusalem to the heavens and back, all in one night while you were sleeping. And you know what Abu Bakr said? If he said it, then I believe it. That's how he gave him that kunya as-Siddiq. The next type of heart is the distracted heart. That heart that's not dedicated. Even you see it when they're doing any type of acts of worship, because you're supposed to have khushu'. Usually you hear that word connected with just salat, but in all acts of worship, you're supposed to have that khushu', that dedication, right? Even the Prophet ﷺ, he tells us that when we slaughter good, right? Don't just slaughter an animal with an old dull knife, but be precise, right? Be surgical with it. Anything you do, you got to be the best at what you do, right? Be precision, like be very, very, very surgical. Have your heart all the way in it, right? As long as it's something that's connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet ﷺ, keep that heart all the way in. So anyway, the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned in his hadith, he said, "Id'u Allah wa antum muqinun bil ijabati wa alamu anna Allah la yastajibu du'a min al-qalb ghafilin la'i." The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, call upon Allah Ta'ala with firm certainty. Because when you're making dua, that's at the moment where your heart should be all the way in it. But you ever try to make dua and your mind is everywhere else? A lot of times when we make that salah, as soon as you takbir in, all of your dunya starts running through your mind. You ever notice that? You know, everything is a distraction. That's in order for you, now the Prophet ﷺ is telling you this. Now it's up on you to be able to create barriers to block these things out. You have to become people of mujahidah. And it's a struggle to keep that heart on that straight path. So anyway, so the Prophet ﷺ, he said, call upon Allah Ta'ala with certainty and Allah Ta'ala will answer you. He gave you the key. That's it right there. It's a cheat code, blueprint. Have firm resolution that Allah will answer your dua. Don't put a time limit to it. That's where we always set ourselves up for failure. You make that dua, if Allah Ta'ala said He's going to answer it, khalas, that's it. It's going to get answered. When? We don't worry about that. We just keep moving, right? Then the Prophet ﷺ, he said, know that Allah Ta'ala doesn't answer any dua of a heart that's distracted. It's unmindful. It's in a state of ghafla, it's distracted. Have to keep that in mind. The next type of heart is the emotional heart. That heart that's just like, it's either constricted, narrow, depressed, anxiety, whatever. It's just all over the place. You feel in a state of sadness, right? And I'm not talking about the moment, the one that's temporary, all right? The temporary feeling, but the one where it becomes like your permanent feeling. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said this, and understand that in Islam, things are also known by the opposite. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he mentioned in this hadith, he said, وَأَفْضَلُ إِيمَانُ الصَّبْرُ وَالسَّمَاحَةُ. The Prophet ﷺ said that the best or the most virtuous characteristic of your iman is a sabr, restraint, patience, right? A couple khutbahs ago, we talked about that. We talked about what sabr meant. And he had like 5 definitions, four meanings all impregnated in that one word, right? Patience and having a forgiving and tolerant nature. Because when you don't, the opposite of that, you don't have patience. You're always in a state of hastiness or upset. And most people nowadays that walk around, they're internally angry. They're internally sad, depressed. They're internally anxious all day long. A bad character gets praised in our time. That's how you know it's not from Islam. And the Muslims, we shouldn't mimic that. See, the problem is that sometimes we think that because, you have to put on this persona of being a thorough or solid person, so you put on this mean mugging, right? But you got to be able to hold yourself, because there's a time and a place to be tough. And that time when you're tough is when you're on that battlefield. Most people, they clam up, turn into a nut, right? But however, on a regular basis, we walking around 24-hour tough like we in the penitentiary. Why people are hopping out at corners now and shooting each other over a stop sign? Because it's that fake gangster, right? When they get them bracelets slapped on them, they start crying. Oh, wait a minute, call my mom, yo. I don't even understand. You see what was happening, right? All of the crying and things of that nature. But think about this: what will you do on the Qiyamah? Because all of that crying is going to be to no avail of you because you were already forewarned in the dunya already. Don't do so and so. Don't act like such and such. The moment, the fact that you're hearing it and the fact that I'm saying it, we are all accountable from this moment on. You can do what you want to do once you get outside of Jummah. But we're accountable from this moment on and for the rest of your life. It don't matter if you live another 30 years when you resurrected, if you break any of these things that are mentioned here, because it's not about me, it's about the ayat, we will be accounted and asked about that. Weren't you explained that you shouldn't have this type of heart? You shouldn't do these type of things? So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he mentioned that you have to have that forgiving. You gotta be patient. Because dealing with other people, this is why our dawah isn't that effective. Because we don't know how to deal with people. This is why our families are broken. Because many of us we're like callous, we're like hard, like the Bedouin Arabs, right? You know, our relationships. You know, I had a little brother. Little brother, wake up. You can't show too much happiness. Hey, big bro, what's up? Shut up, nut. That's how we deal with each other, right? That's not Islam. That's not Islam, but that's how you create that type of relationship. Your love is demonstrated based off you slapping somebody around. Some people grow up to do that as an adults. Some people, most people, we verbally abuse people. We think that's love. Well, at least I know you love me because you cuss me out. That's not love. That's a sick, twisted understanding. We have to make our behavior in our families in Islam more of our model. And lastly, is that a heart without dhikr. Having a heart without dhikr. Some of our hearts are absent of that dhikr. Meaning, we may stop for the time of salah, pray that prayer, but when the prayer is over, are you sitting and doing any type of dhikr? La. Are you reading any Quran? La. Because dhikr isn't just limited to just, that as well, but it's also Quran. Putting your place in the remembrance of Allah. Putting yourself in places where people remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Surrounding yourself. A lot of our failure is the lack of effort that we exert on our own behalf. The most of our failure comes from the lack of effort that we exert on our own behalf. And sometimes we just burn out after a couple days. We'll do a thing for a couple days and we think we got a big victory. But when death overtakes you, if you're still not doing those things that you were doing to get that victory, then therefore it's going to be against you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he warns you. He says, فَوَيْلٌ لِلْقَاسِيَةِ الْقُلُوبُهُمْ مِنَ الذِّكْرِ اللَّهِ. When Allah ta'ala, he says, woe to the one, it's like a warning. And anytime where Allah ta'ala says, فَوَيْلٌ, that meaning that the thing that is being mentioned here, it can also cause you to end up in the fire. So Allah Ta'ala is saying, woe to those whose hearts has become hard against the remembrance of Allah. Right? When you remind them, they don't want to hear it. So in closing, all of these bad characteristics, and there's much more. I was just reading a book this morning on this particular subject. But there's much more. But anyway, you sum it up, you'll find that a lot of these characteristics are characteristics that the munafiqeen possess. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says in the Quran, إِنَّ الْمُنَافِقِينَ يَخَادِعُونَ اللَّهَ وَهُوَ يَخَادِعُهُمْ وَإِذَا قَامُوا إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ قَامَا كَسَالَى يُرَاءُونَ النَّاسَ وَلَا يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says about the munafiqs, about the hypocrites. He said, indeed, those hypocrites, they seek to deceive Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? How do they deceive? Because they show the outward displays. They're the ones that smile in your face, give you all of the good characteristics. But you know the thing what outdoes nifaq, hypocrisy? And this is why we always got to be on guard against our own hypocritical behaviors, right? And I ain't talking about just literally just being that person that you say you do something and you don't do it, but we talking about also protect the heart from being, being that hypocritical where the heart becomes content, right? It's kind of expected for some error to happen because people commit sin, right? Like if a person commits a particular sin, but that sin is only happening once. When you make a whole culture and a lifestyle out of it, that's a whole nother story, right? Once. Damn, I ain't know FanDuels was haram, right? You gamble. You want, yo, I want $500 on FanDuel. That joint is haram, man. That's gambling. Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, fine, khalas, right? He stops. But if he goes now every Friday, he keep betting and betting his check. That's making a culture and a lifestyle out of it, right? So anyway, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about the munafiqeen, they seek to deceive Allah. He said, but they only deceive themselves. It is Allah Ta'ala who deceives them. Because when they stand up, and this is usually a characteristic of the munafiq. One, they think they deceived Allah, right? Number two, Allah Ta'ala said, when they stand up for salat, they stand with laziness, right? Everybody, these trending topics that you see on social media, where people be like, man, the imam, when you get behind the imam and he deceives you, right? And they talking about when a person's standing there and the imam is reciting Quran. Part of this is problematic. Why? Because it's a mind state of laziness towards the prayer. You're supposed to just go and approach the salat, right? Worry about when it's going to cut off, when it's going to stop, and things of that nature. That falls on the imam. That's bad etiquette on his behalf if he's reciting too long to overburden the people in the fard prayers. And the nawafil prayers are prayed by themselves. So if you join them in the ranks for Taraweeh, whatever the prayer is, that's nafil, that's different, right? It's a little different. So they stand up lazy. So when you approach the prayer, like, I really don't feel like doing this, all of these things, you got all of these different things like running through the mind of why you don't want to pray. These are the characteristics of nifaq. Nifaq. He said they stand lazy. Many of them stand to be seen, right? You ain't praying, but you're gonna stand up anyway because everybody gonna grind you up, right? And they don't remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala except a little. Subhanaka Allahumma bihamdika wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Iqamas salat.